Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshiva Javar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Peah, Chapter 7, Halacha 2. We're going to get into more exclusions where the tree is going to be exempt from shkichacha. Now, keep in mind, one of the things that's going to be different from a tree than from gathering wheat is that on a tree you have fruit that's on the top of the tree and you have fruit that's on the bottom of a tree. So that's going to be a difference, and that's going to be covered in this Mishnah and Gemara. There's going to be another difference that we haven't covered yet. What happens if you have a specific famous variety of a type of plant? For instance, let's say you have a variety of plant that grows unusually large fruit, and it's just a variety that's from an area, it's famous from that area. What's going to be the status of that? We see, by the way, that you have in today's economy, in today's world, you have products like champagne, products like Parmesan cheese, you have bourbon whiskey. These are things that are protected that come from a specific region. And so you're having the same thing going to be coming up with produce. What happens if you have specific types of produce from a famous region, a famous growing region, from a specific variety? That has not been addressed yet. And we're going to get into a Gemara that's talking about rows. Keep in mind, we were talking about rows between grain with and stacks with not stacks but sheaves with Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai, and now it's going to come with rows of trees, because there's also going to be a similar halacha for that. And the Gemara is going to go through a couple of ways to try to understand what the Mishnah is talking about with these rows of trees. There's going to be a sort of back and forth between Rabbi Lazar, the Amora, and Rabbi Yochanan to try to dig into this Mishnah and understand what do they mean. So let's get into it. So the first case. In the case of an olive tree that is found standing between 3 rows of olive trees, and the rows separated by 2 strips of land, and the owner forgot to harvest the tree, it is not shkichacha. Now, let's say, so the point of having this strip of land is so that visually it's clear that this is a row of trees, okay? So in the halacha, we can say, oh, this is definitely a row of trees. This strip of land runs east to west, and let's say there's 3 trees on the north side of this strip of land. And then, on the south side of this strip of land, there might be another 3 rows. And then, there might be another strip of land, and then there might be another 3 rows of trees. So this is going to create this visual. Now, we learned about this before with Malben. These are like literally molds used to make rectangular bricks, and the Hebrew for brick is going to be lebna, and the word becomes synonymous with rectangle. Okay, so in this Mishnah, it's referring to these strips of land again. What could these strips of land be? Perhaps it's even just like an irrigation ditch, and it creates a strip because it runs east-west. Okay, that could be an example of something like that. We know that, by the way, wouldn't create a separate field. That doesn't create a separate field. That would for grain. For grain, that would create a separate field, but not for trees. For trees, you need to have a fence, and it has to be blocking any twigs from connecting from one side to the other. So that's not going to create a separation. But for here, this irrigation ditch or strip of land is not going to create 2 separate fields. But what it does do is it creates a visual indicator that this over here on this north side of the strip, that this is going to be a row of trees. And that's what it's trying to get at. That's the deep point here. And, we're going to be talking about now what happens with these olive trees that are within this strip. You might have lots of these irrigation ditches that we could call these bricks and strips of land, but we're going to be talking now about, let's say, you have a strip, you have an east-west strip, you have two east-west strips going, and on the north side of the first east-west strip, you have, 3 rows, just to make it very easy, 3 rows of trees. And then in the middle, between, the first irrigation ditch and the second irrigation ditch, you have another 3 rows. And then you have on the south end of that east-west irrigation ditch, you have another 3 rows of trees. Now, the Gemara is going to care about what happens in this middle row, the one that's situated between the north and the south ditch, and this row, and what's going to happen with this middle tree. What's going to happen if the farmer is going to gather his stuff and he doesn't see it because there's all these trees in the way. He misses it. Now, we already established halacha about hidden produce. We know that hidden produce has special halachot about that. And we know that, in the case of malicious hidden produce, that it never falls to shkikaka, right? So if the poor person comes and specifically tries to hide it, he didn't do anything, okay? It's still the owner's property. You're not going to get rewarded for that. But hidden produce, where you're missing something because it's hidden, that's going to be a little bit different. So the next case is going to be where, so in this last case, the owner forgot to harvest the tree, and it's going to be situated, between these 2 strips of land. We're talking about this middle strip, and the owner forgets to harvest his middle tree. That is not going to be shkikaka. That's going to be hidden. And because it was hidden, he would have eventually remembered it because he would have walked around. He eventually would have seen the middle tree and he would have harvested it. So that is why it's not going to be subject to shkikaka in a nutshell. But we're going to look at the second case. Now, if you have an olive tree, says the Mishnah, that has 2 seahs of fruit on it, and the owner forgot to harvest it, it is not shkikaka. So we learned a sugya that explains that in the Torah, they're deriving the halachot for the grain sheaves and the all the grain sheaves and the trees to be connected with a gezerah shava, so that the laws are also going to be connected. So we know over there that if you have 2 seah of produce in the sheaves of grain, that's going to be exempted because it's significant enough that you're going to remember it. By the way, the 2 seah comes out to 9,600 zuz, and that weighs about 90 pounds. Okay, now we're talking about 90 pounds of grain. The stalks and the leaves on that is not going to be included. There's only the grain. So over here, we're talking about the olive tree has 2 seahs of fruit. Now, we're not talking about twigs. We're not talking about leaves. We're talking about the fruit. And that fruit, once it reaches this 2 seah limit, just like the grain field, because the halachas are going to be the same on it, the owner forgets to harvest it, it will also not be shkikaka because it's significant enough that you will eventually come to remember it. The Mishnah now is qualifying the ruling of this last Mishnah concerning a distinctive olive tree. So now we're getting into these cases like, from regions like Champagne and Parmesan and, bourbon whiskey from Kentucky. It's the same sort of thing going on over here. Mishnah says, when are these words said that a distinctive tree is not subject to the law of shkikaka? At a time that the owner did not yet begin harvesting it. But if he began harvesting it, then even if it is known as an olive tree that drips oil in its time, if he forgot to complete its harvest, it is not subject to the law of shkikaka. Now, later on, we're going to be getting into the special kinds of olive trees with special kinds of varieties, and we're going to be learning that from over here. And over here, it's saying that, says the Rambam from Matanos Aniyim, chapter 5, Halacha 24, is basically saying that a distinctive tree whose harvest has begun is subject to shkikaka because we assume that it will likely be forgotten permanently by the owner. Even if the owner later recalls the existence of his tree, he will not return to it, for he will remember having begun his harvest and will assume that he completed it as well. So that's a really important insight by the Rambam for it. And the other point by the Rambam is that this clause about 2 seah of fruit does not apply to a tree that is laden with uh, 2 seah, and if the tree remains with 2 seah after its harvest has already begun, it's going to be exempt from shkika. So um, basically, I think what the Rambam is trying to say, this is going to be explained in detail in the Gemara, but um, the clause is going to qualify only the ruling of this, where it's saying that a tree that has a name in the field is not subject to shkika, but the Mishnah is asserting that this holds true only as long as the owner has not yet begun harvesting a distinctive tree. But if he did begin to harvest it, even a distinctive tree will be subject to the law of shkika for the fruit that remains on the tree. So that's the point of the Rambam, is that if he already began harvesting it, and let's say there's still 2 seah of fruit in the tree, but he already harvested it, that's going to be a difference, because he's going to assume that he didn't forget anything, that he finished the produce, he finished the production, he finished the harvesting. And because he's going to assume, says the Rambam, the finishing of that harvesting, what remains in this distinctive tree will be subject to shkika. And that's sort of the point of how the Rambam's understanding this Mishnah. By the way, the Rambam is a great source for trying to learn the Mishnahs, because he really goes through all of them to really give a lot of great insights on how to read it. So I highly recommend, when trying to look at the Mishnah, to go look at the Rambam first, because it's a great resource and great tool. Now the Mishnah teaches a rule concerning the point at which olives on a tree become shkika. So when are these olives going to become shkika? What point does this now go from, hey, it's this, in this harvesting process, and then at what point does it flip where this tree now will, the remaining fruit will flip and now become, the property of the poor? What exactly is this point? What is this tipping point? So Mishnah reads, as long as the owner has olives remaining to be gathered beneath the tree, he has olives that he may harvest on the top of the tree, at the top of the tree, and so long as there are olives beneath the tree, those remaining on the tree are permitted to the grower. Now, we have to bring this up because, a tree is not like harvesting a bunch of stalks of grain. Stalks of grain don't have a top of a tree and a bottom of a tree. They don't have tops of stalks and bottoms of stalks, right? It's just, there's the ear of, the shibboleth, there's the ear of wheat, and there's a stalk that attaches to it, and that's that. The anatomy is different. But a tree is not that way. You have fruit that grows at the top of it, fruit that grows at the bottom of it, and so it necessarily is going to be different. The harvesting process will be different, and you really have to climb into the tree to go collect it. So at what point will this process change where the property rights now shift from the owner of the tree over to the poor? When does it become the poor's property? So, again, to reread this, Mishnah, as long as the owner has olives remaining to be gathered beneath the tree, in other words, he's already piled a lot underneath the tree, and he's basically continuing to harvest through this process. In other words, the Mishnah says, he has olives that he may harvest at the top of the tree. And basically what he's saying is, the Mishnah is basically trying to say is that as long as there's olives, piled up beneath the tree, and they haven't moved away these piles yet, what remains in the tree is going to be permitted to the grower and is not shkika. Now, there's going to be a dissenting view. Rabbi Meir says in the Mishnah, the olives on the tree are forbidden to the grower from when the one who searches out hidden olives goes on his way, having completed his task. In other words, at that point, the owner may harvest them up until this point. So here's what the Beurim of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says about this. He's saying, according to Rabbi Meir, the olives on the tree remain permitted to the owner even after those beneath the tree have been gathered, and in his view, these olives do not become shkika until after all the hidden places on the tree are subject or searched for olives. Only then are the remaining olives on the tree considered shkika and forbidden to the owner. So that's that's a really good insight on it. So later on, the Tanakama is going to hold that since this final check is not always going to be performed, the olives become shkika even before this point. That is also a note by Rabbi Moshe Feinstein in his Beurim. Now, I want to point out the Rambam commentary because it's here. And Rambam is going to explain this mission a little bit differently. And again, I highly recommend getting the books for the Rambam's commentaries on the Mishnah. They're really fantastic. So the Rambam, in his view, he's saying that this exchange deals with limits that are placed on shkika rights to the poor. The Rambam continues that the olives on the tree are those which were overlooked and are now shkika. And the Tanakama is going to rule that as long as there are shkika olives beneath the tree, the olives on the tree are exclusively for the poor. And once, however, the shkika has been gathered from beneath the tree, the remaining olives on the tree are permitted to everyone. Rabbi Meir is maintaining, says the Rambam, that until the tree reaches the point at which beating it with a stick will produce no further olives, as is done by one who searches out for hidden fruit, the olives on the tree are reserved for the poor, even if no shkika remains beneath the tree. So that's a really good reading and insight. Now let's get into the first part of this. We're going to go with a back and forth between Rabbi Lazar, the Amora, and Rabbi Yochanan to try to understand these strips. Now keep in mind, the row of three, this is going to be Bet Shammai. Row of two will be Bet Hillel. Okay, everything after two will be the third one will be the property owner according to Bet Hillel, and according to Bet Shammai, if you have a row of three can fall to the poor, but the fourth one will fall to the owner. So that's going to be hinted at here, alluded at here, and there's a lot of subtlety going on with this. So Rabbi Lazar starts off with this, Amoraic ruling on the first ruling of the Mishnah, and here's what he says. Says the Gemara, this is a case of the Mishnah where there is a separation of two strips of land between three rows of trees, and the owner forgot to harvest the middle tree. So basically, Rabbi Lazar is saying, imagine you have three rows of three, and between each row you have a strip of land separating each row. It's clearly visible this is a row of three because you even have a strip of land. Let's imagine it's an irrigation ditch, a sizable irrigation ditch, and that it's visual. It's visual. This is clearly not just a row of three. It's not a grove of 9 trees together. It's split by this piece of land. Now, each one is not a separate field. That we know the halacha. I mean, there's no fence that's separating. You need a fence to separate rows of trees or to make fields of trees. But over here, there's still a visual indicator. Okay, and so he's saying that if you imagine these 9 trees arranged 3 by 3, that this middle one is going to be the one that we're talking about. This is what Rabbi Lazar says the Mishnah is talking about. So, in other words, there's no need for anything more than 2 strips of land between these rows. So, Mara Fula points out that one might assume that when the Mishnah speaks of 2 strips of land separating the 3 rows, it requires 2 strips in each direction so that there is a separation between both the north and the south rows and the east and the west rows. And Rabbi Lazar informs us that, in fact, only 2 strips running in the same direction are required. The rows running in the other directions are not required. So to dispel this, right, Rabbi Lazar is saying, no, you don't need a grid where you're having a rows running northwest and east-west and northwest and north-south, right? East-west, north-south. You don't need to make it like a checkerboard, like a checkerboard, chessboard pattern. You don't need to do that. Simply, strips of land running east-west is enough. Okay, you don't need to make it a crisscross pattern. Okay, and so that this middle tree, this is going to be what we're concerned about for forgetting. So Rabbi Lazar is now going to talk about this reasoning behind the Mishnah's ruling. He's trying to explain what does the Mishnah mean so that we can understand what is the Mishnah talking about here. What is the tradition? What is this deep insight? Because it's hard to just get it from a quick reading of it. We want to know what are the Amorim saying this thing means. The Mishnah says, according to Rabbi Lazar, says the Gemara, what are we dealing with in the Mishnah's ruling concerning an olive tree found in the center of 3 rows? That is to say, for what reason is the tree not subject to shchicha? Rabbi Lazar is going to offer a pair of suggestions and dismiss both of them. So Rabbi Lazar knows what you're going to ask, not you, but what another Amarah is going to ask, and he's going to address it and dismiss it. Okay. Gemara reads the first one. Here's the first one. It says, by the way, what Rabbi Lazar is trying to do with this by addressing it and dismissing it, he's trying to prove his point by a logical point called via negativa, which is by taking away the negatives, you're left with what's left, and that positive that's left, that's going to be the logical conclusion. So here's what he says on the first case. He says, the Gemara says, it is because a tree located between 2 strips of land is regarded as a distinctive object. But are there then no other olive trees here between the strips of land? And if this tree is exempt because there is no shchicha for an entire row, can it be that a single tree alone is judged as an entire row? And of course, that's not true. Mara Fulda points out that, hey, although this tree, this one that's in the middle, is a part of a row of 3, it is the only one of the 3 that was forgotten. The other 2 trees in the row were harvested, and a single forgotten tree in a row cannot be judged a forgotten row. And so it's not going to be exempt from shchicha. So basically, he's bringing up this point to dismiss it because, a single tree that's forgotten is not exempt from shchicha. That's the point. Now I want to take a look at Rabbi Kanievsky's point on this. He's saying that this is from his Beur shiurim series. He's saying that based on this, the Gemara is suggesting that the reason this tree is exempt is that it is a part of a row of 3 trees. That's the suggestion, right? Rabbi Kanievsky is pointing out that this Gemara is saying that this is the suggestion. And the Mara Fulda is going to point out that there's an earlier Mishnah in chapter 6, Halacha 4, that rules that if you have 3 sheaves or 3 heaps of olives or 3 stalks of grain, that they're not shchicha. And the Gemara over there is going to hold that this is true only if the 3 items form a row, which is defined as 3 sheaves in a straight line. So that's what this is trying to say. This was trying to ask. This is what it's trying to do. But although this tree is part of a row of 3, okay, it is the only one of the 3 that was forgotten. The other ones were not forgotten. So, the other 2 trees in this row were harvested, and because of that, we know from this other Mishnah in chapter 6, Halacha 4, Peah, that the one that's left out cannot be judged as a forgotten row, and so that does not exempt it from shchicha. In other words, it will still be subject to shchicha. It's not saved by the rest of the row. That's what it's trying to point out. It doesn't save it in this case. So now here Rabbi Lazar is going to present the true reason that this tree is going to be exempt from the law of shchicha. Rabbi Lazar points out and says, rather, this tree is exempt because it is hidden by the trees of its row and the rows of the tree on either side of it. So basically, he's saying, says Amara Fulda, that the 2 outer trees of the center row and the two rows on either side are hiding it. And the exemption of a tree hidden by other trees is based on the ruling of the earlier Mishnah, chapter 5, Halacha 6 of Peah, which states that if grain was overlooked because the poor blocked it from view with their bodies or covered it with straw, it is not shchicha. And here too, since the tree was overlooked only because it's blocked from view by the other trees, it does not become shchicha. That's what the Mara Fulda is saying that this is saying. Now, the Rambam is going to point out in Matanos Siniyim that the tree not need be surrounded on all four sides in order to be exempt from shchicha. Even if it's surrounded on three sides, it's going to be exempt. So that's an interesting chiddush, but Rabbi Yochanan's not going to agree with Rabbi Lazar that this is what this Mishnah means. So here's how Rabbi Yochanan interprets what's going on in this Mishnah. You'll see how it's very different from Rabbi Lazar's point. Okay. So Rabbi Yochanan said, the Mishnah is speaking of an olive tree of Nod, which, because of its great value, is commonly planted in the center of a group of trees. And the olive tree of Nod is a distinctive, memorable tree, and therefore it is not subject to shchicha. Now, historically, Nod is the name of a place. We're not talking about the Nod in Bereshit. We're talking about Nod in Israel, and we're talking about in Bereshit, that's going to be east of Eden. So that's going to be somewhere in Iraq on the east side of the Euphrates River. But over here, we're talking about in Israel. In Israel, it's a place where olive trees are known to be of unusually good quality. And Rabbi Yochanan is basically saying that the Mishnah is discussing a tree from this place, and because of its quality, this tree is going to be regarded as distinctive. And so, because it's distinctive, it's going to be shchicha. Now, I want to point out what the Vilna Goan, Mara Fulda says. Mara Fulda is explaining that according to Rabbi Yochanan, the configuration described in this Mishnah is not essential to the exemption. Rather, it is mentioned only because it's a way to identify a tree. And the Mara Fulda is pointing out what Rabbi Yochanan is saying is that it is common to plant these highly valuable, highly regarded trees in this configuration surrounded by lesser trees. And the Mishnah is identifying a tree of Nod by referring to this unusual configuration in which it's often found. Now, I want to point out a few things with this. Rabbi Lazar is reading this as a way to try to understand a halacha out of rows of trees. Okay, he's looking at it very on the shot level of, hey, this is how you have this divider, and I'm digging into this, and I'm seeing rows of trees, and it's like, Bet Hillel, and you have a row, and you forgot one of the three. So the two of them you've already harvested, one should be left out, that one should be subject to shchicha. That's really the point of how Rabbi Lazar is reading it. Rabbi Yochanan is saying, no. This configuration by the Mishnah, and by the way, neither me nor you would get this without the Meforshim, which is why it's so important to look at the Meforshim. And what they have is a tradition of how to read this Mishnah. And that's what we need, right? And we need to learn it too. And what they're saying, no, there's a tradition. And when you go and you look at how the farming is done in Eretz Yisrael, when you have these unusually famous kinds of trees, you'll surround them with lesser trees sort of to crown them. And, and because it's distinctive, that's why it's not going to be subject to shchicha. Really, Rabbi Yochanan is describing a farming practice on how they were planting and farming these sorts of magnificent trees back in the day. Now, something that comes up here, throughout the Shas, you have special halachot for battened pomegranates. The battened pomegranate trees were specifically unusually good, and the fruits were unusually sweet and really, really large. And unlike pomegranates from anywhere else in the land of Israel, and probably anywhere else in the world, they have a special halachic category. They're so unusual that if one of them falls into a pile of pomegranates, it does not get nullified by the pile of pomegranates in any number. There's other halachot for figs from a certain area and dates from a certain area because of unusual quality. Also, in the cases of certain kinds of dates where other areas are unusually bad quality. So there are a lot of, there's also grapes. There's an area of grapes where they specifically tried to get the grapes from a specific area for the wine for the temple because the grapes for the wine were unusually good. You always want to beautify a mitzvah. So over here, the trees of Nod were perhaps a different variety, or perhaps growing them in Nod, they were particularly good. So it's talking about this special kind of fruit. Now, perhaps if the olive trees of Nod are a specific variety, then you would have, you might not have a whole field of this variety. Maybe they're harder to plant, and maybe that's why you're crowning these with regular trees, right? So you still will have this distinctive tree, and that's another way to look at it. But the halacha is gonna talk about rules of origin, because you could read this as the trees being distinctive because they're in this place Nod with unusually good fruit, or perhaps you could read this as a variety. But in either case, you see similarities for these kinds of laws in agricultural economy today for export. You see that with special kinds of butter and special kinds of cheeses and special kinds of wine or special kinds of whiskey, and so it's no different than how they had it back then. So the Gemara is going to qualify the Mishnah as understood by Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan is gonna you're gonna get some more explanation about this. Rabbi Yossi said, "It is not essential that the tree actually be from Nod or one of Nod. Rather, the same is true even for all types of olive trees that are valuable to the owner. Since it is the owner's practice to check on these valuable trees frequently, as if they were olive trees of Nod, even all these other types of olive trees too are not subject to shkika." So the Pnei Moshe is pointing out that Rabbi Yossi is discussing a tree that, unlike a tree of Nod, are not intrinsically valuable, but nonetheless valuable in the eyes of the owner, who checks on them and checks on them constantly, as if they were trees of Nod. In other words, says the Mara Fulda about this, in the owner's eyes, these trees are distinctive, and therefore, because they are distinctive in the owner's eyes, which is what we learned in chapter 7, halacha 1, they are going to be exempt from shkika. So that's the tradition and the point that Rabbi Yochanan is trying to point out. Now, we're going to continue with Rabbi Yochanan's point, and he's going to address it as compared to Rabbi Elazar's point, and try to say, no, this is how the Mishnah is to be read and understood. Okay, the Gemara cites this Tanaic dispute concerning the text of the Mishnah. So the sugya reads, there are some Tanaim who teach an olive tree that is found, and there are some Tanaim who teach an olive tree that is found standing. In other words, some Tanaim read this Mishnah as saying that they'll admit the word omer, which means standing, and they'll read it where they're saying that an olive tree that is found standing between three rows, which is, by the way that it appears in this Yerushalmi version of the Mishnah, but there's two ways that they're writing it or reading it. So one of them will have where it's reading an olive tree that is found, and some will say they'll add this extra word standing, or the other one has the word standing out, where it says that that is found standing. So the Gemara is gonna connect the dispute with the dispute between Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yochanan about these two barises, these two different ways to read this Mishnah. So, by the way, just as a note, there are subtle differences between a Yerushalmi Mishnah and the standard Bavli Mishnahs. There are subtle differences. Usually they're the same, but if you look carefully, you'll see different arrangements or different spellings of the words, or sometimes an extra word will be in there. And they're saying that there are differences also with these Tanaim, that there was two ways to teach this. Okay, so so let's talk about this dispute and connect it with Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yochanan. Gemara reads, according to the one who says that the Mishnah reads, that is found. Okay, the Mishnah supports the ruling of Rabbi Yochanan, who holds that the tree under discussion is a olive tree of Nod or some other favored tree. In other words, one way of reading this, the one that says that is found, in other words, the standing part is left out, Rabbi Yochanan is giving us the tradition of how this is read with the Tanaim who were teaching this Mishnah written that way. Okay, and basically this tradition that now is that it's talking about a tree that's a specific type of variety or a specific area or something that the owner is proud of and he wants to check on frequently, or it has an unusual status and maybe it's going to be hidden among the other trees, and because it's going to be unusual, even though it's hidden, and eventually the owner is going to remember it, and it's not going to be subject to shkichucha. So now let's look at the other tradition and the other way of understanding, the other way that the Tanaim were teaching, the other way this is written, which is the other way it was written, where the Mishnah is read, that is found, an olive tree that is found standing. So that, it's read as an olive tree that is found standing between three rows. The other way to read it is, the Mishnah is an olive tree that is found between three rows. So the way that says an olive tree that's found between three rows, that's what the tradition Rabbi Yochanan is teaching. Let's see what the sugya says. Sugya says, but according to the one who says that the Mishnah reads that is found standing, the Mishnah supports the ruling of Rabbi Elazar, who holds that the discussion of the Mishnah concerns any olive tree planted between three rows of two squares. So the Marafulda points out that this is found, okay, is gonna mean something that one searches for, and it's showing a valuable object that like an olive tree of Nod, and therefore the reading is going to support Rabbi Yochanan. But the found standing part, okay, that's going to emphasize the fact that the tree is standing between the other trees, and that supports the reading and view and tradition of Rabbi Lazar, who holds that the exemption is due to the tree being hidden. So Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Lazar are the same person. It's Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas, but and by the way, in the Babylonian Talmud, he's referred to as Rabbi Elazar ben Padas. Okay, so but a lot of times it'll switch between the reading where it'll write Elazar in the Yerushalmi, and then even in in the same halacha, it'll say Rabbi Lazar. So it's actually the same person. It's not two different people. I just want to point that out. So the Gemara is going to talk about the Baraisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan's view, that is talking about this special tree, and it's talking about this Tanaic tradition where they're reading it, the Mishnah, as an olive tree that is found. Gemara cites a Baraisa in support of Rabbi Yochanan. A Baraisa supports the view of Rabbi Yochanan, for it was taught in a Baraisa, says the Gemara, regarding a case in which an olive tree is located between three rows is subject to shchichucha. When are these words stated? When the owner recognizes the tree as being an olive tree of Nod and still passes by. In this case, the tree becomes shchichucha and may not be revisited. But, says Gemara, if he did not recognize the tree as being one of Nod when he passed it, he may turn around and pursue it to pick the fruit before it is assumed to be shchichucha, even if it is now as much as 100 trees from behind him. So I want to unpack this with the Mara Fulda's approach. He's saying that if the owner did not recognize the value of the tree when he passed it, he cannot be assumed to have truly forgotten it. For at some point, he will most likely realize that it was overlooked and he will return to gather it. And because the tree is not positively forgotten, it does not become shkicha. Now, the first part of this Gemara is saying that if the owner did recognize this tree and he voluntarily passed it, now it becomes shkicha because he ignored it. He knew it was there, and for whatever reason, maybe he decided to leave it for shkicha for the poor. Maybe want to give him a nice present. But if he is assumed to have just walked past it and was distracted, and then he remembers it later, he comes back, then that's not going to be subject to shkicha. Now, why is this Gemara written this way? This is trying to show that this kind of tree is not always shkicha. If the owner, in the intention, looks at the tree, recognizes the tree, and then passes it, okay, he can't revisit it. That's the point. He can't come back to get it because he acknowledged the tree and then he decided he didn't want it. We care about that because we care that later, he can't have a claim where he can always come back and take it. There has to be a tipping point where it falls to the property of the poor. And so what this is doing is this is taking away an argument that could be said where it says, no, this is always mine and it can never become property of the poor. This is saying, no, it can become property of the poor if he acknowledges it, recognizes it, and then decides he doesn't want it. Then it becomes property of the poor. But if he's going and he's distracted and it's hidden from him and he doesn't notice it, and then even if it's 100 trees later, and then says the Gemara says even 100 trees behind him, and then he comes to recognize it, remember it, then he goes back and gets it, then it is not going to be subject to shkicha. So that's the distinction. And from this baraisa, it's clear that the olive tree of this Mishnah is the one that is being recognized as unusual, a distinctive tree, like an olive tree of Nod. And that's going to support this interpretation and view of Rabbi Yochanan. Now, the Mishnah stated, when the word stated, if he began harvesting it, then even if it is known as an olive tree that drips oil in its time, if he forgot to complete its harvest, it is subject to the law of shkicha. So this is now moving on in subject, and I just want to point out from the Mara Fulda, it's saying that whether the person recognizes the tree, the baraisa implies that the tree is unique, and this supports the view of Rabbi Yochanan, who holds that we're talking about this uniquely special tree. And Rabbi Lazar is saying the exemption for this tree from shkicha is just a function of its presence among other trees, and that the tree itself is no different than any other tree. Really, what this whole argument breaks down to is this unique special tree crowned among other just regular trees? And that's the view of Rabbi Yochanan and that tradition by the Tanaim. Or is this a functional process of how things are harvested? And depending on how it's harvested, all the trees are the same. There's no special trees in here. It's just that you missed one of them. And again, there are some Tanaim who teach one way, and the Mishnah is written one way, and there are some Tanaim who teach another way, and the Mishnah can be read and written and is written another way. So that's a interesting thing. So the statement of the Gemara of the tree bearing two sayas of fruit. Okay, we're gonna get into this. Okay, so where it says in the Mishnah, but if the tree whose harvest has begun has two say of fruit, and the owner forgot to complete its harvest, it is not subject to the law of shkicha. So now we're talking about this two say of fruit, and the two say becomes so significant that it becomes exempt. Okay, it's substantial and you'll come to remember it. But of course, there's going to be a lot of fine points about when does this status, reach? When does this happen? Because you have top of the tree, bottom of the tree. At what point is the harvesting? Is this going to be? How is this going to work? Okay, but here's what we're talking about in a nutshell. So, according to the statement of the Gemara, we have a tree bearing 2 seahs of fruit, and it's going to be exempt from shkicha even if it was forgotten after the harvest already began. And this would seemingly contradict the Mishnah, which states explicitly that once the harvest has begun, even a tree of 2 seahs is going to be subject to shkicha. So the Gemara is going to explain this and try to get it so that we can understand it easily. Just to simply understand what this Mishnah is saying, basically, the Mishnah is saying that a tree of 2 seahs of fruit is exempted from shkicha only if its harvest has not yet begun. Okay, but if the owner began harvesting it and then left, and assuming that the work was done, it is going to be subject to shkicha. But the Gemara is going to state that a tree of 2 seahs is exempt even if the harvest already began. So it seems like there's a contradiction, but the Gemara is actually going to show that there's no contradiction here. They're talking about 2 different cases. Okay, so Gemara reads, the ruling concerning a tree whose harvest has begun, was not stated with regards to the Mishnah's previous ruling concerning a tree of 2 seahs. Rather, it was stated with regard to the earlier Mishnah, which states, regarding any olive tree that has a name in the field as a distinctive, extraordinary tree, even if it is known as an olive tree that drips olive oil or drips oil in its time, this is the law. And here's what the Gemara reads. It says, if the owner forgot to harvest it, it is not subject to the law of shkicha. The Mishnah's ruling concerning a tree whose harvest has begun was stated with regards to this ruling. In other words, it's not with regards to our Mishnah's ruling of a tree of 2 seahs. So the Mishnah does not in fact rule that a tree of 2 seahs whose harvest has begun is subject to shkicha. What it actually says is that even a distinctive tree whose harvest has already begun is subject to shkicha. Now, when will that be? And so it is with regard to this ruling concerning a distinctive tree that the Gemara is stating the above. Okay, talking about if you have a distinctive tree, at what point will some of that become shkicha? That's how they're reading this Mishnah and this Gemara. So Gemara continues, says, but if this distinctive tree whose harvest has already begun, has 2 seah of fruit on it, and the owner forgot to complete the harvest, it is not subject to the law of shkicha. So basically, let's take a look at what the Vilna Goan is saying to help us understand it. He's saying that this qualifying phrase here is not directed toward the ruling concerning 2 seahs. Okay, he says the exemption of the 2 seah applies also to a tree whose harvest has already begun. And in stating the ruling of 2 seahs, the Mishnah does not differentiate between a distinctive tree and an ordinary tree. And therefore, this exemption applies also to distinctive trees. And the Gemara therefore rules that even in the case of a distinctive tree whose harvest has begun, says the Vilna Goan, if the tree contains 2 seah of fruit, it is exempt from shkicha. So that's a really good way to explain it and to try to understand it. Okay, there's really what the Gemara here is trying to do is trying to show that there's no contradiction at all with this Mishnah. They're just trying to explain how does it work, so that we get like which case is which. Okay, so we have a regular tree, we have a distinctive tree, we have before it started harvesting, then we have when it started harvesting, and at what point was it forgotten, right? So if it wasn't started harvesting, and there's 2 seah of fruit there, distinctive tree, and he just misses it and he walks by, the halacha is going to be one way. Okay, we just talked about that. Then if you started harvesting this distinctive tree and then you stopped, okay, and then you thought you had everything and then you moved on, Okay, that now is going to be subject to shkika. That's going to go another way, right? And so the law for the distinctive tree and the non-distinctive tree with regards to say of fruit, with regards to what you've already started when you started harvesting and then you've moved on because you thought you got everything, that now is going to have the same law. That's what the Vilna Gaon is pointing out, and that there's no difference between the distinctive tree and the regular tree. And that's why the halacha for to seya here is not adding in this extra note of distinctive tree, because as Vilna is pointing out, is it's applying to all trees. Once you started the harvest, you pile it up, and then you moved away the stuff and assume that you got everything. Okay, that's the point. In other words, the distinctive tree doesn't save it forever. That's what the law here is trying to show you. They've just given you a case by Rabbi Yochanan, which shows that the distinctive tree doesn't have a forever save on it, and now they're showing you another one where, yeah, this distinctive tree can become subject to shkika under XYZ circumstance when you've started to harvest. Okay, it's not a forever thing. That's the point. The Mishnah stated, as long as the owner has olives waiting to be gathered beneath the tree, he has olives that he may harvest at the top of the tree. So now we're going to get into this, top of the tree, bottom of the tree, which is, again, different way to harvest than just based on the biology of tree. That's not the same as a bunch of grain, right? So there's going to be two observations regarding this ruling, and the first one is going to be like this. So the Gemara reads, they interpreted the ruling with two interpretations. The Gemara presents the first interpretation. The Mishnah states, as long as the owner has olives waiting to be gathered beneath the tree, he has olives that he may harvest at the top of the tree. Basically, what this is going to be implying, says the Rosh, to understand this, in his commentary on the Mishnah, he's saying that this implies that if the owner has no olives beneath the tree, in other words, they've already been gathered and there's none remain, he may not harvest the olives on the tree anymore because they are shkika. However, this rule holds only once the harvest has begun. In other words, they're saying now you have two cases, okay? You have olives that are piled up under the tree that you're in the process of taking out of the tree. You have still, olives that are at the top of the tree to harvest. You still have hidden olives in there. And you have a pile that's underneath it. Now, things are going to be different once you haul away that pile, because once you hauled away that pile, you've assumed that the harvest of that tree is finished. Now, whatever remains that's hidden at the top, that now is moving on to the ownership of the poor. Okay, so that rule is true once the harvest has already begun. Now we're going to talk about the rest of it. It says, but before that point, says Gemara, before the olives are shaken from the tree onto the ground, even though the owner does not have the olives on the ground, he has olives that he may harvest on the top of the tree because they are not shkika. In other words, this process of harvesting has not finished. He can still continue, and he still has the intention to continue to try to get up to the top of the tree to harvest them. He might use a pole to do it. He might actually climb to go do it and cut the stuff down. That, by the way, is common with other kinds of things, like with if you're going to collect coconuts or something like that. So in that case, he's in the process of doing it, and he's still shaking down olives out of it. And so these ones that are still up there, okay, because he's still working, he hasn't gotten it to it yet. That is not going to be shkika. Now, the Mishnah's rule does not go into effect until after the olives fall from the tree to the ground, and as long as the harvest has not yet begun, the olives on the tree are permitted to the owner, even though there are no olives on the ground. Mara Fulda is going to explain like this. He's going to say, when the Mishnah implies that the owner's ability to take olives from the tree depends on the presence of olives on the ground, it's referring to a period of time after the harvest has begun. And once a portion of the olives are shaken from the tree to the ground below, the remainder is permitted only until he gathers the olives that are on the ground. The Mishnah is not discussing the period before the harvest. Although there are no olives beneath the tree at that time, the owner is certainly permitted to take the olives from the tree. In other words, that the key point here is once these olives on the ground have been removed, okay, everything is shut off now for the owner. He's finished. He's not allowed to come back and take it. Now we're going to get into this second interpretation of this, okay? So the other interpretation, says the Gemara, is that the Mishnah stated, as long as the owner has olives waiting to be gathered beneath the tree, he has olives that he may harvest at the top of the tree. This implies that there are no longer olives for the owner beneath the tree. He may not take the olives that are on the tree. So this is going to be, this basically is going to say that the reverse is not going to be true. Okay, so the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say, therefore, after the one who searches out hidden olives has gone through the tree, even though the owner does not have olives that he may harvest at the top of the tree, for they are then shkikha. He does not have olives that he may gather beneath the tree. So what is this trying to do? Basically, Gemara is trying to tell us that although the status of the olives still on the tree depends on the status of the olives beneath the tree in this pile, the reverse is not going to be true. So even after the olives on the tree are forbidden as shkikha, those beneath the tree are still permitted to the owner. Okay, so this is a case of A goes to B, but B doesn't go to A. Okay, so basically, this is trying to show us that, in a nutshell, that the status of the olives on the tree depends on the status below the tree. Okay, and after the olives on the tree are forbidden, okay, the olives underneath the tree are still permitted. Okay, that's what it's trying to show. I just want to point out something from the Mara Fulda. Mara Fulda is pointing out a really good insight here. He's saying that once the tree is searched for the last hidden olives, it is certain that the owner will not return to take it. Therefore, any olives that remain in this tree are shkikha. So the Gemara is ruling that although the olives at the top of the tree are shkikha, and thus forbidden to the owner, those beneath the tree that have already been harvested are not shkikha and are permitted to the owner. So the shkikha status of the olives on the tree is governed by the status of those beneath the tree, but the reverse is not true. So just to sum this up, what we're trying to see from this ruling is that, according to the Tanakama, once the tree has been searched for hidden olives, all the olives remaining on the tree are shkikha and forbidden to the owner. But the olives that have already been taken underneath, that is going to be permitted to the owner. Okay, so that's the point. Rabbi Meir is gonna have a different opinion about this, by the way. So the Bryce is going to continue, and it's going to try to elaborate on this law. Bryce was taught in the name of Bet Shammai when the owner puts on his knee pads and completes the task of gathering the fallen olives. This is when it is stated he has olives at the top of the tree. However, once he removes the knee pads, the gathering of olives below has ended, and therefore the olives remaining on the tree are shkikha. So Marafuld is pointing out that this Baraisa by Bet Shammai is trying to say that the person who gathers the olives from below the tree has to kneel upon the ground to protect his knees. He's putting on this garment, these knee pads, and as long as he's wearing that, he's showing that the gathering of the olives below is still ongoing, and therefore the olives on the tree are not shkikha. But once he removes the knee pads, it's showing as a sign that the siman that the gathering is done, and therefore the olives on the tree are going to be property of the poor. Gemara is going to explain why the knee pad is called a barkar. In Aramaic, it's going to be called a barkar. And Rabbi Abahu said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, barkar derives from bar kara, which means of the knee. Okay, that's a Gemara that's there, and that's what it says. The person who searches out the final olives in the Mishnah, now it's going to talk about the person who searches out the final olives. Rabbi Abahu says he is given the name of Mahava because he dislodges the hidden olives. And the term mahava denotes that which is concealed. And you have another verse in the Tanakh that says in Shmuel 1, 23, 23, easy to remember, 23, 23, observe and ascertain all the hidden places where he conceals himself, and eat chava. Okay, it uses the word eat chava. So on over there, the in Shmuel, it's talking about Shaul HaMelech's instructions to the Ziphites on searching out for King David. Okay, and so he's showing that there's a root over here and a root over there that is using out the same word, and that's really it. So it's interesting that I just want to point out that the Shenas Eliyahu in this Mishnah is explaining that the two interpretations represent two divergent views as to the position of Rabbi Meir in this dispute with the Tanakama. And according to the first interpretation, Rabbi Meir holds that before the tree is searched for hidden olives, even if there are no olives beneath the tree, the olives on the tree are not shkika. Thus, he takes a more lenient view than the Tanakama, who was holding that it all depends on whether there are olives remaining under the tree. And I want to point out an explanation by the Vilna Goan. He's saying that according to this second interpretation, Rabbi Meir is ruling that even if there are olives remaining beneath the tree, once the tree is searched for hidden olives, the olives on the tree are shkika. And in this version, Rabbi Meir's view is more stringent than the Tanakama, and that's how the Vilna Goan is explaining it. So I like that, and we'll leave it off for now, and then we'll go on to the next halacha. Thank you so much. This is an addendum to the shiur. I want to point out where it's talking about bar kar being the knee pad, talking about bar kara, and talking about this concept of mahava, talking about hidden, all these hidden places, observe and ascertain all the hidden places where he conceals himself. The Yerushalmi is filled with puzzles. Rabbi Yochanan says that the sages put puzzles in to sharpen the students' minds. This is not left here accidentally. This is actually a deep agadic piece, and I went over this with the Rosh. With the Rosh Kollel and also with the Moshgiach of the Yeshiva, and was showing it to them and going over it. Now I was looking for commentary, and I can't really find commentary for this piece of Agadah, but in the Yerushalmi style, this is really left there. This is not hanging. This is left there as a puzzle for you to figure out. And I have my own answer for what this is trying to show us. Why did they put this in here? And I would like to offer that to you. So what this is trying to show, this is talking about olive trees from special trees. And olive trees, olive oil is all connecting to wisdom and Torah knowledge, okay? And this is really trying to show that there's no knowledge like Torah knowledge. There's no wisdom like Torah knowledge. And that why they're putting in this baraisa from Bet Shammai on the knee pads in this way, why Rabbi Yochanan's editing it like this. He's showing that if you're going to be picking up these olives to make olive oil, and you're on with the knee pads and you're working hard, that you can dislodge these hidden olives. And this is really an allusion to that, hey, you need to work hard to study Torah. Torah has all these hidden olives that are there, and you need to put on your knee pads, and you need to go and do it with a lot of intensity and a lot of sincerity and a lot of hard work to get at these hidden olives. And again, the menorah was the symbol in the Torah for wisdom. And so what this is trying to show you in an agadic way is that there's no knowledge and there's no wisdom in the world like Torah knowledge, and it's worth hard work. And to get at these hidden gems, these hidden places where it's all concealed, you need to be putting in the hard work. Now, I want to point out one more thing. I just finished up Midrash Rabbah, all of it, about 5,000 pages, and this Agadah does not appear in there. So sometimes you will get Agadah in the Yerushalmi that's not in the book of Agadah in the Midrash, which is interesting. So this is this together is really being a Midrash that's here in the Gemara, but not in the Midrashim, and this is for Agadah to show us this connection between going after hidden wisdom and hard work, and how just like you have special olive trees and special rules, that here too with trying to go after special Torah knowledge and work through all these rules, there's all sorts of hidden treasures that await you. So I encourage you to really put on your knee pads and study Torah hard. Thank you.